Well, so some of you were with us the whole time. In the spring, we did 10 classes on different religions, new religions and cults and things like that. Now we've done 10 more. So that's 20 different times that we've been looking at different religions. And I thought maybe as a wrap-up, we could talk about, out of all these religions, out of all these sincere people, really nice people, going off in 100 different directions, what are you hearing? Is it coming through, do you think? Okay. A little bit higher. Okay. Anyway, so we've been doing all these different religions, and today it's not very popular to say we have the right one. We're in a period of religious pluralism. Where do you come off saying one's better than another? How do you judge a religion? And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight, not in a harsh way, but just there are differences, and those differences add up, and those differences make a difference. So I just call this Why Christianity. And we've got all these wonderful people out there, like I said, who are worshiping God, and they're all over the world going in a bunch of different directions. And what I'm going to do tonight is give you, it's not going to be complete, but it's just going to be 7 things that you can say about Christianity that make Christianity not just different, but better than these others. So, here we go. We're going to use the word better. I think it's a far better worldview for several different reasons. So here's the first one. Unlike a lot of religions, we'll talk about the others in a few minutes, but Christianity is testable. It's legit. I mean, you can find out things in the world. So I'm not going to be arguing from the Bible tonight. We'll talk about ways that it's testable, the way it holds up to scrutiny. And I'll send out an outline of this in case you'd like to see that later. But I mean, you start with the Gospels, don't you? The Gospels are reliable. They've done a lot of work on manuscript evidence and all, and you can trust what's in the Gospel. Now, as an example, Buddhism came along, and the closest documents that we have to what Buddha really said is like 500, 600 years. Islam is kind of in trouble because they're not sure they have the original Quran. One of the early caliphs rounded up a whole bunch of them and said, yeah, they're kind of different. Okay, we'll throw out all of these and this will be the right one. Well, how do we know that was the original one that Muhammad wanted? Let me just share a couple of places, let you see how much the Bible is telling you this is real, this happened. So I'm just going to take you to Luke. He starts off and he says, I carefully investigated everything. Well, people have carefully investigated Luke, and they've said over and over again, this guy is a #1 historian. He's not just a rabid Christian, but he examined things really carefully. Now, he said things like this, in the time of Herod, or he mentioned Caesar Augustus, or he talked about Quirinius the governor. This doesn't sound like a myth, does it? This doesn't sound like once upon a time. This is not fairy dust. This says this time period, this person, they're in charge. If you read the rest of Luke, especially what he wrote in Acts and all, they've done all sorts of research as far as the place names and how you sail ships and harbors and names of political leaders in these different areas that you go to, because they would differ, the terms that you would give these leaders. He got it all correct. So again, this is testable kind of stuff. You can go take a look at it. Paul hooks right into this too as far as being testable. Look what he says in 1 Corinthians 15. This is not Paul's original language himself. He took this from a creed that was even earlier. So Paul writes Corinthians in 55 AD, but he says, let me share with you a creed that I was given, and I'm going to pass it along to you. And in the creed, this isn't the whole creed, it's several verses in 1 Corinthians, but read it sometime. It's really neat. It's like a little nugget right in there. Tracy? Yeah.
Christianity is false.
It's done.
And so for any belief system, you have to say, well, how would I know if your belief system is false?
Yeah.
If you can't come up with a test like this,
yeah,
where you can know that it's false, then there's no way to know that it's true.
Now, other religions are not verifiable, are they? It's just trust us. And Christianity says, no. And so here's what Paul says, talking about Jesus here. It says he appeared after his resurrection to more than 500 brothers, most of whom are what? They're still alive. This is 55 AD. It's only 20-some years after Jesus' resurrection. So if people were, let's say, 25 at the time Jesus died and showed up again, they'd be in their 50s. They're around. Paul says, don't believe me? Go talk to them. They're out there. They're all over the place. So, I mean, talk about a challenge. And like Tracy was saying, Paul in that same chapter says, if Christ hasn't been raised, our preaching is useless. We're all wasting our time. Paul didn't say, but gee, stick with it. You know, it's a nice system. You'll feel good. You feel happy. He says, no, it's a dud. It's stupid. What a waste of time. Get out of it if this didn't happen. Well, there's no other religion that puts that kind of emphasis on history, right? No religion links everything about itself to that one event, the resurrection of Jesus. So I'm going to give you an example of how every once in a while I'm going to throw in another kind of religion just to let you see the difference between Christianity and the others. So let's take Mormonism. They have an impossible time proving theirs. Steve talked about that. Their history, their archaeology, they got nothing. There's nothing out there. No evidence at all. So what do? They have to back off, and it becomes something they call a burning in the bosom. That's the only way you're going to tell their faith. That's subjective. That's how you feel on the inside. In other words, they can't see anything out there, so they're going to say, it's inside. You know, how do you feel? You feel like the Book of Mormon is true? Then it's true. Well, I'd kind of like to have proof, because the Book of Mormon claims there's stuff out there. They just can't find anything. So you say, well, I'll take Christianity over Mormonism as far as testable information like Tracy was talking about. So here's the challenge to you tonight. Can you make a case for the reliability of the Gospels? If somebody ever says to you, really, you're trusting 2,000-year-old documents? Get with it, right? They're full of contradictions. Who knows when they were written? Who knows who wrote them? They're all hundreds of years after the time of Jesus. Not true at all. And Steve's website and my website, we both have a lot of information I'd be glad to share with you or send you information on that. The other thing, of course, is can you actually argue for the resurrection of Jesus? I think the best thing to do is take a look sometime at Gary Habermas. He's got this thing called the minimal facts of the resurrection. I'm not going to take the time tonight to do that, but he lays out 5 facts that all historians that are worth their salt, whether they're Christian or non-Christian, 5 things that all historians agree on. And if you look at those 5 things, there's no other alternate explanation that will work for those 5 things. They just don't work. So you're kind of left with, it must have really happened. So, I hope you can do those 2 things. But there's more testable things that you can find out. Like I mentioned, the manuscript evidence. Tons of manuscripts that we have that we can go back and see what the original documents were like. Archaeology. I'll just give you one example. This is one of my favorites. John says, in the book of John, he says there's this place called the Pool of Bethesda. He says there are 5 colonnades. He gets real specific. They're kind of holding it up or decorative, whatever they were. He says 5. Okay, 70 AD, what happens? Rome comes and just, don't mess with Rome, right? They just leveled everything. So if John is writing, let's say, in the 200s, it's not really John, they're just making this stuff up. Was that just him guessing, whoever this anonymous author is? 5 colonnades? Why would he say 5? Well, now they've done work there and they've dug it all up, and guess how many colonnades they found? 5 colonnades, right? So archaeology has never contradicted the Bible and never contradicted the New Testament. What about history of other religions? That might be a way to take a look at the differences between Christianity and these others. So I'm just going to rattle off a couple things here. How did Christianity spread? Through nonviolence. How did Islam spread? Right? It's just the opposite. Jehovah's Witnesses. Before 1935, you could vote. Not now. You could participate in a war. Not now. You could observe holidays. Not now. It's okay to smoke. Not now. Jesus died on a cross. No, it's on a torture stake. And of course, they had these times that they kept predicting things, when Jesus was going to come back. So you look at the church history and you go, man, you guys missed it. And you keep changing things, right? The ground is not very solid for you. How about Scientology? Do you remember when I talked about Scientology? What's their church history? Fraud. They've been indicted. Several of their leaders have gone to jail because of these terrible things they've done. They're getting sued all the time, child abuse, and all sorts of terrible things there. Mormonism, the Book of Mormon's had all sorts of changes to it. So you look at church history for these different groups and you go, I think I'll take Christianity, thank you very much. Along with that is take a look at the founders of these different faiths. Wow. I'll put Jesus up against Muhammad any day. Joseph Smith. He kept peddling this thing. He bought it, and he called it the Book of Abraham. You heard about that one? Okay, he said he actually had a document from Abraham. And then it disappeared. It kind of got lost for a long time, like 100 years or something. I mean, it was a long, long period of time. And everybody said, I don't know. They found it. I forgot where, but they found it. And they brought it out, and experts have looked at it. It has nothing to do with Abraham. It was a funerary document from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after Abraham. It is Egyptian, and it is in hieroglyphics, but nothing to do with it. So he's peddling false stuff, right? And you're going to trust him for eternal life? I don't think so. How about Mary Baker Eddy? I was talking about her with Christian Science. She was a fraud. She claimed that she got healed through certain ways, and her doctor said, no, absolutely not. So she's been caught. L. Ron Hubbard. Do we need to spend any time on L. Ron Hubbard? The guy's whole life was a fraud. Everything that was said about him was a fraud. How about Jehovah's Witnesses? You had Charles Taze Russell as the starter of Jehovah's Witness. He was peddling miracle wheat. Give you an idea. He was basically a con man. He claimed he knew foreign languages. There was a court trial, and people gave him some Greek to look at, and he said, I don't know. It's all Greek to me. Yeah, so he couldn't do that at all. He pushed pyramid power. I always found that one really interesting. You guys ever heard of pyramid power? That was a big deal maybe 100 years ago or something. The idea was all the measurements of the pyramid, if you measured it in feet or square footage or whatever, those numbers would mean something. Like if you divided by a certain way, you could get 1776. The American Revolution, right? So, I mean, he was big into this stuff. So you just look at all these different leaders and you go, I don't think so. I'll take Jesus over any one of these people. Okay, so that's number one. Christianity is testable. It holds up in the real world. Here's the second thing. It offers free salvation. I mean, you think about other groups, and again, just because it's last night, we're going to go a little quicker over this, but Buddhism says you have to follow the eightfold path. You have to have the right attitude, the right this, the right that, the right something else. And you got to do it. And you better suck it up, get busy, get to work. It's all works oriented. Scientology, it's works, right? Get to work. Islam, you got 5 pillars of Islam, and you better be doing those, but it's way more than that. It controls every aspect of your life. It's a tremendous burden. Mormonism, let me share 2 quotes as far as Mormonism goes. Joseph Smith said, you want to be exalted? Just keep the whole law. Oh, okay, is that all? Really? Oh, I'm good to go then. No, I don't think so. Bruce McConkie was also a Mormon leader. Men are not saved unless they struggled and labored to the point that they stand clean and spotless. Really? Yeah, how long would we last? I mean, just thinking about myself here, until I stood clean and spotless. There are a lot of advantages that we probably don't think of all the time regarding a free salvation. We say, well, that's good, I'm glad it's free, but it has so many things to offer. For example, we don't look down on others. If let's say you're a Muslim, and you try to do all those things, and you've got a Muslim friend down the street, and he or she is not quite doing all those things, you're going, I'm a better Muslim than that person, right? But Christianity says we're all getting a free gift. Right? There's no status as far as that goes. We don't have to be spiritual superstars. Isn't that good to know? I mean, just my prayer life is really pretty poor. I mean, I'll just admit that. I have a hard time sitting. I can't even imagine praying for an hour. That's just me. So I'm very grateful that it's a free salvation. If it depended on prayer life, I'm in trouble. I mean, honest to goodness. So we don't have to be spiritual superstars. How about this? It doesn't depend on our education. Isn't that nice? Little kids can come. Adults can come. Elderly can come. Any place you're on that spectrum as far as education goes. And it doesn't depend on our finances. Remember Scientology? Open your checkbook and keep writing. Right? It never ends. Yeah. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent, and it gets into the millions if you've got the money. Drain that IRA, drain those college funds, get a mortgage on your house, whatever it is. Christianity says that doesn't count, right? It's not how much you drop into an offering every Sunday. Nobody's keeping track of that. How about number 3? Christianity, this is a good one to know. It's the closest thing to what's really out in the world. It's not just a little thing that you think of up in your head. It matches reality. I mean, for example, and I know other religions believe in this too, but it says there is a God. This is interesting. It says people are wonderful, right? We do some really wonderful things. I always think every 4 years the Olympics are great, right? It's just fun to watch people get together and help each other. And you say, why can't we do that all the time? Because we've got the other half to this. You know, we're really fallen individuals. Christianity is never surprised by people doing terrible things. It predicts it. It says, yep, that's the way people are. And because we know ourselves so well and because we're fallen, Christianity matches up really well, I think, with the outside world that says, you can't do it on your own. You're not going to be able to do it on your own. You know yourself too well. That's reality. When you're alone and you think about your heart, you go, I'm going to need some help here, right? I can't do all of these things I'm supposed to do. So salvation's got to come from somewhere else. We're not going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Christianity expects there to be evil. Hinduism all talks about Maya, you know, that this world is an illusion, which means evil is an illusion. Really? Tell that to the Ukrainians. Tell that to the 6 million Jews that died. Of course, evil is real. And Christianity says, you bet, it is real. How about number 4? This is kind of obvious, I know, because it's got the word Christ in it. But everybody loves Jesus. And I'd say we have the monopoly on Jesus. But other religions bring him in because they like Jesus. So Mormonism's got Jesus, Hinduism's got Jesus, Buddhism's got him, Islam certainly has him, and others and others and others. All these religions love Jesus. Well, what's there not to like, right? But if you want to really corner Jesus, you want to have the most Jesus, right? You go with Christianity. Just a couple of quotes here to let you know as far as the impact of Jesus and all. Here's Napoleon. He says, I know men, and I tell you that Jesus Christ is no mere man. Between him and every other person in the world, there's no possible term of comparison. Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and I founded empires. But on what did we rest the creations of our genius? Upon force. Jesus Christ founded his empire upon love, and at this hour millions of people would die for him. That's Napoleon. Huh? One other person, I like this other person a lot too. I bet some of you have read some H.G. Wells. Right? War of the Worlds, Invisible Man. Okay, well that's his fiction. He was actually better known during his time period as a historian and a thinker, a philosopher. He wrote a history of the world. Can you imagine taking on a history of the world? I mean, talk about ego, you know, you can pull this off to write a history of the entire world, every civilization. Well, he did a good job. And so people liked H.G. Wells. And here's what he had to say. He was an atheist. He says, I'm a historian, I'm not a believer. And I always like to grab quotes from non-believers. I think that helps our cause better than finding somebody that already agrees with us. So he says, I'm not a believer. But I must confess as a historian that this penniless preacher from Nazareth is irrevocably the very center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in all history. Here's a guy that wrote a big fat book on history, and he says, throw it all out or just focus, you know, if you want to learn the one person that counts, it's Jesus Christ. So I wanted to share with you for just a minute here. Probably some of you have heard about this book called Person of Interest. And if you don't have a copy, it'd be a really good one to get. This is about like his 4th book, just J. Warner Wallace. He's come to the church. He's come to our class before he got huge. You know, he's worldwide. He's all over the place. So it'd be hard to get him back here. But he's a sweet guy, a really warm guy. He's a cold case detective. And so he wrote a book about the impact of Jesus on history. And so if you give me just a second here. It says, Jesus still matters even if you're not a believer. See, that's what I like about this. Again, he's saying, well, I'm not, you know, somebody may say, well, I'm not a Christian, so why learn about Jesus? That's just for you Christians. No, the impact he's had on the world. So let me just give you a couple of ideas. He matters because he inspired more literature than any other person in history. He matters because he was the catalyst for visual arts, inspiring painters and sculptors in every generation, genre, style, and nation. He matters because he's been the topic of more songs, hymns, and symphonies than any other figure in history. What did Bach do every time he wrote a cantata or anything? He'd sign it to the glory of God. Every time. And here we're coming up on the Christmas season. What are we going to start hearing? Handel's Messiah. all that is the Bible, right? It's just verses taken from the Bible. And just the story of the way he composed it. He said he was like in a trance or something. In just a few weeks, he had the whole thing done. But I mean, he's not the only one. Even modern songs today, even people that aren't Christians are singing songs. My favorite group in the 60s was the Byrds. So that really dates me. But they had a song, Turn, Turn, Turn. And it got to be #1. And it's Ecclesiastes, right? Now, that's not Jesus, but I'm just saying there are all these groups still today that are finding themes from the Bible. He matters because his teaching set the standard for moral reform and initiated a worldview that led to the flourishing of education. So don't let anybody tell you, oh, Christianity, you guys haven't done much for education. Oh, really? Yeah, it's done more for education than any other worldview ever. He matters because he established a worldview that encouraged exploration and motivated his followers to investigate the natural revelation of God. What's he talking about there? Science. The Judeo-Christian worldview has been the biggest support of science. So again, don't let anybody tell you Christianity has tried to snuff out science. Absolute nonsense. He matters because his influence on spiritual seekers and religious thinkers is so overwhelming that every major world religion either mentions or merges him into their theological systems. Right? We want a little bit of Jesus too. Okay, so anyway, that just gives you an idea. It's a good book. Everything he does is really wonderful. So it's called Person of Interest. It's been out for a while. I don't know, I might be able to find a used copy or something as well. So here's another thing, number 5. What's so great about Christianity? The assurance that we have. Now, I know it kind of ties in with what we were saying before about free salvation, but I wanted to emphasize this, the assurance that we have. You look at groups like the Muslims, they don't have any assurance. When they die, the good deeds and the bad deeds are going to be weighed, and Muslims go into the afterlife going, I have no idea. I don't know. I'm hoping for the best. Okay. Really? That's where you're going to live your life, hoping, I guess, for the best. And the same with these other groups as well. Let me tell you I'll keep it short, but this was a story about a Christian Science grandmother that was dying, and the grandson is watching this. He's not anything. He's just watching what's going on here. And she tried to get healed in Christian Science. That didn't work. And so now she's abandoning, as the doctors are saying, you're heading toward death. She gave up on Christian Science and then tried to get doctors to heal her. Didn't work. Now she's on her deathbed. And so he said he went there. And he said, my grandfather and I sat at her bedside for 2 days as she was in the process of dying. He said she regained consciousness several times. During these times I spoke to her, looked into her eyes, and sought some kind of comfort or source of strength to deal with her death. All I saw was death and despair. Our local Christian Science church offered no comfort whatsoever. Not one person from the church ever came to the hospital. Because after all, if you go to the hospital, you're confronted with the very thing that you've been denying for your whole life. And Christian Science wasn't working. So it said, my grandfather sat there and quoted from Mrs. Eddy, Mary Baker Eddy, claiming that my grandmother was not seriously ill and that she'd get up and walk out of the hospital. His heart was not in it. And so she does pass away. But I mean, this is the kind of thing that other religions have to deal with. There's no assurance at all. There's that terrible emptiness inside when they're really facing death. Number 6, logical consistency. So what am I talking about here? Well, things like it's logical, looking at Christianity, made in the image of God, but we're fallen. You look out in the world and you say, yep, that's the way people really are. The problem is logical. We say it's us. It's not education. It's not lack of money. It's not our position in society. It's not our job. It's not none of these things here. Our problem is inside. Right? So we're being logically consistent that way. And then the solution, which funny enough, it's not inside of us. The solution is outside of us. And other religions, well, let me share with you just a couple of ideas here. I'm just going to rattle off a few because we're short on time here. But what about Eastern religions? Right? So how are they doing as far as logical assumptions and all? Well, if all is one, how come we have individual souls that get reincarnated? Right? Because they believe in monism. Everything's one. Well, but we have individual souls. How can individual souls be one? That doesn't make any sense. If we're paying off our karma, how come we don't remember our past lives? Right? We don't know. Who or what works on the karma? Right? Is there a karma machine someplace that's You know, as you die, it looks at it and whirls the dials and says grasshopper or, you know, whatever you're going to come back as. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. There's something called deism. We were talking about deism before class started. That's the idea that there's a God, but he kind of wound up the universe and let it go, and he's off somewhere, and there's no revelation, no interaction. Well, if there's no revelation or interaction, how do we know that that kind of God exists? Right? Where did that come from? Postmodernism. If we make up our own meanings in books, why would you write books? I always thought it'd be fun to find a postmodern author and take the book and sit down with him and say, I'm glad you're a Christian and you're advocating Christianity, and he'd be horrified because he'd say, that's not what I meant. I said, well, that's what I thought you meant. You know, so, okay. Anyway, Hinduism. If all is Maya, illusion, how would we know? Right? So you go on, you find out there are all these problems as far as logic goes with other religions here. All right, last one, ethical concerns. What does Christianity champion? The rights of women, the rights of the individual, human dignity. It gives great dignity to the human race. And work. Christianity is the thing that said work is a good thing. Evil and suffering gets explained. And now we know why it's there and what we need to do to deal with it. And here's something I think is really cool about Christianity. If you're not a Christian and you say to somebody, hey, you watch them doing some evil, and you say, stop doing that, that's evil, what are they likely to say? Who are you? In fact, there's a professor back at, I think it was Yale or Duke, Yale, I think, and he got into that whole issue, talking about, because he wasn't a Christian, he said, we've got no way to make people do the right thing, because we got no standard. The standard's us. So Bob's standard might be different than mine, Diane's might be different than Bob's. I mean, so who's going to point a finger and say, this is immoral, stop doing it? They can turn right around and say, so, right? We all have our own standards. Christianity says, no, there's a standard out here, and all of us have to match up to that standard. So we can confront evil and call it evil. Atheists can't call things evil. They can say, I don't like it. Yeah, but that's really different. Our guilt feelings. We live in a moral universe. Christianity says there's a moral universe there. So no wonder we feel guilty, because we have failed the God that's out there. We have failed to meet his standards. It's not just that we messed up and it cost us some money, or we made another person feel bad or something like that. No, we have bigger issues, right? We've failed that standard out there that's someplace else, because Christianity says we live in a moral universe with a moral God out there. And thank goodness we have a life that can be lived. So I'm going to end with this, because that sounds kind of vague. What do you mean a life that can be lived? This is from The Case for Faith. Really good book. We did this years back in the class here. There's a man named Mark, and this is one of the most horrible things that could ever happen, but they accidentally ran over one of their children and killed the young child. And it says, so deep was his initial despair that he had to ask God to help him breathe, to help him eat, to help him function at the most fundamental level. It says he came out of this crucible a changed person. He abandoned his business career and he attended seminary. Through his suffering, though he said he'd never choose it, he said it was horribly painful, it was life-shattering, he's been transformed into someone who would devote the rest of his life to bring God's compassion to others. In the pulpit for the first time, he drew on his experiences with God in the depths of sorrow. People were captivated because his own loss had given him special insights, empathy, and credibility. In the end, dozens of them responded by saying they too wanted to know this Jesus, this God of tears. And so, I hope none of us ever have to go through something like that, but Christianity can be lived, right? We can actually have a life despite the terrible things that can come into our life. Anyway, so those are the 7 things. I'll send out some information to you about this as an outline. I want to thank everybody here and for the people that are going to be watching this later. Thank you all for being part of the class, and then we'll start again. The plan is to get going late January with all sorts of new stuff, right? Steve and I are still kicking it around, but we never do a repeat. It's always new material. And I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving and a super Christmas. Interesting time, isn't it? Because for the first time you can probably actually mention Jesus and get away with it.